أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد, my respected elders, my dearest youngsters, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this segment, we're going to be reviewing an educational video entitled, Are the Imams alayhimus salatu wasalam merely righteous scholars? So this is essentially what's referred to in Arabic as Nazariyat al-Ulama al-Abrar, the Ulama Abrar theory, which states that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wasalam are merely pious, righteous, God-conscious, God-fearing scholars. They represent the pinnacles of knowledge and taqwa, and they are the inheritors of the intellectual and practical legacy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the proponents of this theory deny infallibility, divine appointment, miracles, supernatural powers, and other such auxiliary qualities and characteristics or attributes that other schools of thought within the Shia madhab began to attribute towards the Imams. So at the beginning of this video, it is mentioned that there is a scholar by the name of Dr. Muhsin Kadiwar who has come up with this idea, or who has propounded the idea or the theory of Ulama al-Abrar. This is slightly, I would say, misleading, or you could say that the video is being economical with the truth, in the sense that, or you could say it's a case of the fallacy of misattribution or false attribution, because even though it is true that Ayatollah Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar has actually discussed this theory in great detail, and that he inclines towards it in a whole book that he has written on it, entitled Al-Qira'ah al-Mansiyya, the forgotten reading or the forgotten interpretation. In this book, he has tried to highlight that there were intellectual trends, or rather actual schools within Shi'ism, that with the passage of time got buried, they got suppressed. But in the classical period, and even in the pre-classical period, in the very early period, that is the time of the Imams alayhimus salatu wasalam themselves, he's talking about this 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, even up to the 4th century, there were some very prominent people who belonged to the Shia madhab who used to hold these views. And if you go by narrations, there are indicators that Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wasalam also used to hold similar views, if you go by the narrations. But then with time, with the passage of time, other schools became more dominant. So it's an interesting book, and it's something that we can discuss later. But the important thing to keep in mind is that you cannot attribute Nazariyat Ulama al-Abrar. The Ulama Abrar theory, it should be very clear, is not the idea of Ayatollah al-Sheikh Dr. Muhsin Kadiwar. It is simply an idea that has been, you could say, revived, or that has been discussed in serious depth by him in the modern period. Otherwise, the idea in itself, the theory in itself, goes way back to the time of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, as we shall see. So that's why I found the beginning of the video a bit misleading, or you could say economical with the truth. And it's not giving you the full picture. It pins this theory on Ayatollah Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar, who we have no issue with. Ayatollah Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar is one of he's a product of the Hawza Ilmiya of Qum. So he's a Hawzawi product from the Hawza of Qum, and he's also someone who has a secular background. He studied at he teaches at universities. He has a career of university level teaching as well. But primarily, his religious education was obtained at the Hawza Ilmiya of Qum. He studied the Muqaddimat, the Sutuh, and he reached the station of Ijtihad after having attended Bahth al-Kharij under Grand Ayatollah al-Sheikh Hussein Ali al-Muntadhiri, who is himself one of the most prominent students of Ayatollah Syed Hussein al-Burjardi, who was the chief of the Hawza of Qum in his time. So, yes, he is a distinguished scholar, Ayatollah Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar. He has ijaza of ijtihad. He's a mujtahid, so he's not exactly someone that you can... And he's from the Hawza Ilmiya of Qum. So I know if you go to the mullahs in your communities, they might probably say, oh, he's an alternative or deviant thinker, because his researches do not support mainstream views. But this is a rather childish way of looking at it, because just because you don't like someone's research doesn't mean that you get to label them as deviant or as alternative thinkers. I mean, you have to look at what research, what proofs, what evidences the person is presenting before you just dismiss them. Okay, and but unfortunately, yeah, there are people who will do this, and this just goes to show you that sometimes when they bring up this excuse that, oh, someone is not Hausa educated, or he's not from the Hausa, so we cannot rely or we cannot trust what he says, this is just a smokescreen. It's a false excuse. Because when people from within the Hausa, and not ordinary people, but the top and brightest students of some of the brightest mujtahideen and maraji' of taqleed in the Hausa, when they come forward and they present researches that don't agree with what's popular, even they get labeled as deviant or alternative thinkers. So that means there is no objective criteria. Anyone who disagrees with you, you're just going to label them as alternative thinkers or deviant thinkers. And so you can go ahead, you can opt for that approach, but academically speaking, intellectually speaking, it's not a very balanced approach to take. Rather, instead of dealing with these labels, it's better to look at what evidences they present. In any case, the important thing that we want to clarify here is that Nazariyat Ulama al-Abrar, or the Ulama Abrar theory, cannot be attributed to Ayatollah Dr. Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar. Even though he is a primary discussant of this theory, he is someone who has discussed it in quite some detail, but the theory is not originating from him. So to attribute it to him and not share the background of where he's actually getting it from is slightly misleading. I guess in 10-13 minute videos you can't do justice to deep topics like this. So I guess maybe one excuse we can find for them is time constraints, or the fact that in such a short video we can't expect them to present the whole history of this. But it would be good if they had, even at the outset, said that Ayatollah Muhsin Kadiwar is simply the presenter of this theory in the modern period. But in reality, this idea that Imams are merely pious, righteous, God-conscious scholars, this idea doesn't start with him. Rather, at the very most, you could say it ends at him, and in the modern period he is the primary proponent. But if you go into the classical period, and even in the pre-classical, the very early period of Shi'ism, you find, as he himself demonstrates throughout his book, that this theory was the predominant view. It was supported by some of the greatest, by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wasalam. If you go by narrations in the books, they indicate that the Imams affirmed and approved of this theory. And it is also supported by some of the greatest and most learned scholars and jurists who studied under the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So when you dig deep into the sources, you find the first person with whom this is associated is Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. And I think we referred to this narration previously. This narration is given to us in Rijal al-Kashi, which is one of the most authoritative textbooks of Ilm al-Rijal, which was abridged by Shaykh al-Ta'ifa Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Tusi. In this book, you have this narration which tells us تَذَاكَرَ ابْنُ أَبِي يَعْفُورَ وَمُعَلَّ بْنُ خُنَيْسٍ. There was a discussion, a debate, a dialogue between Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, who is a student of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and a companion of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and al-Mu'alla ibn Khunais, who is also a contemporary of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and also listed among his companions. So these two have a debate over what? What's the topic? What's the motion? Ibn Abi Ya'fur puts forward the motion. He says, فَقَالَ ابْنُ أَبِي يَعْفُورَ, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur said, الْأَوْصِيَاءُ عُلَمَاءُ أَبْرَارُ أَتْقِيَا. He says the awsiya, the vicegerents of the Holy Prophet, the successors of the Holy Prophet, who are the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, they are ulama abrar atqiya. They are ulama, they are scholars, they are abrar, they are righteous atqiya. They are people of taqwa. They have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's their real status. We follow them because they are the most righteous and pious scholars after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. But Mu'alla ibn Khunais, he differed with this. He disagreed with this. The riwayah says, وَقَالَ ابْنُ خُنَيْس. Ibn Khunais said, الْأَوْصِيَاءُ أَنْبِيَاءُ. He said, no, this is, you're demoting their station. They're just pious scholars? No, they are anbiya. They are prophets. They have the same station as prophets. And in fact, we can call them prophets because they share all the qualities and attributes of prophets. So they're no different from them. So they have this debate. Luckily, both of them have the opportunity to present this difference of opinion that they're having for adjudication and arbitration in front of whom? In front of Imam Abu Abdullah Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi afdalu salati wassalam himself. So the narration says, فَلَمَّا اسْتَقَرَّ مَجْلِسُهُمَا قال فبدأهما أبو عبد الله عليه السلام. When both of them were settled in his presence, Imam Abu Abdullah as-Sadiq alayhi salam addressed them and he said, Ya Abdullah. He turned to Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. He doesn't talk to Mu'alla. He talks to Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. And he says, أَبْرَأُ مِمَّنْ قَالَ إِنَّا أَنْبِيَاء. He turns to Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur and he says, I disassociate. I have nothing to do with anyone who claims that we are anbiya, that we are prophets. So this is where in Rijal al-Kashi, the edition that is edited by Jawad al-Qayyum al-Isfahani, it is published by Mu'assasat al-Nashr al-Islami at-Tabi'a li Jama'at al-Mudarrisin bi Qum. This is the standard Qum edition, which was brought out. The first edition was brought out in 1427 AH. On page 213, biography number 116, hadith number or narration number 4/456. So here what you see in this narration is that Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam discredits and disassociates himself from the statement of Al-Mu'alla ibn Khunais. He rejects the statement and the claim of Al-Mu'alla ibn Khunais, who is trying to claim prophethood or a status similar to prophets for the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. He rejects that theory, and through his taqreer, he affirms the position of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. So it turns out Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur was right. And Imam affirms his statement that Imams are not Anbiya, but rather they are merely pious, righteous, God-conscious scholars. Now, who is this Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur? So basically, the Nazariyat al-Ulama al-Abrar, where do you get this term from? Ulama Abrar, that Imams, this idea, this concept, if you want to trace its history, where does it start from? Where does it originate from, this idea that Imams are righteous, pious scholars? And that's it. So, well, it does not originate with Ayatollah al-Sheikh al-Duktur Muhsin Kadiwar. He is simply the one who has gone into the sources, and he's, in light of narrations like this and other evidences, he has come to the conclusion that this theory was the dominant theory. It's not an isolated opinion. Rather, he has tried to demonstrate in his book that this was the dominant mainstream Shia position, which had also the support of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt until the 4th and 5th century, after which Sheikh al-Mufid's theory of Imama and what the Imams are started to become more and more popular, and then in the later periods, the school of Sheikh al-Mufid became more dominant. So now so ultimately, when you're going to attribute this theory, where is it coming to us from? It is not coming to us from Ayatollah Sheikh Muhsin Kadiwar. That's important to keep in mind. He is simply someone in the 21st century discussing it, elaborating it, looking for other evidences for it, but he's just a discussant. This idea, historically, where is it originating from? And this riwayah from Rijal al-Kashi that we just presented, it is a sahih and authentic narration. And the authentication of it inshallah, will be presented in a research paper that we will make available to the public, inshallah. How the scholars of Rijal, using and following the traditional methodology, they authenticate this narration and they say, yes, it is reliable and authentic. So the important point that I'm trying to highlight here is, where is this idea coming from? Ulama Abrar, who was the first to use these words for the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam? It is not Ayatollah Dr. Muhsin Kadiwar, it is Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. And he uses these words in the presence of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He presents his theory in the presence of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and the Imam affirms it. And he rejects the theory of who? Of whom? Of Mu'alla ibn Khunais, who is trying to elevate the station of the Imams to the level of prophethood. And that's why even later on you find Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. You read Uyunu Akhbar al-Rida, Imam disassociates himself from not just those ghulat who are claiming that Imams have divine status, that they are gods, or that they have godlike attributes and powers. He says, no, mimman qala inna anbiya, aw man idda'a lil a'immati rububiyatan, aw idda'a li ghayri al-anbiya'i nubuwatan. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says, we don't only disassociate from those who claim Imams are gods or godlike, we also disassociate ourselves from those who claim prophethood for entities like Imams who are not prophets. So the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are very clear, and Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, he presents this theory in front of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and Imam does taqreer of it, yani he endorses it and he affirms it. So this is where historically, if you're looking for a point of origin, where is this idea coming from? Well, it is coming from Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, who is one of the most distinguished students and companions of Imam Abu Abdullah Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi afdalu salatu wasalam, and it was an idea that was presented before the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam himself, according to the narrations, and the Imam endorses it and approves of it. So the question now is that, given that in today's modern period, in our communities, this theory is no longer popular, it is not accepted, it is not the mainstream opinion within the Imamiyya school. The question then becomes, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to label the proponent of this theory, a person like Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, is it permissible for us, because his understanding of Imama and his view of Imama, which also coincidentally happens to have the endorsement of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. See, he also considers Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam to be an Imam. He's not rejecting Imama of the Imam. No. He's simply rejecting the extra attributes that some of the ghulat are trying to attribute to the Imam. So he is an avid follower of the Imam. You have to remember that if you go into the narrations, you will see narrations like him telling the Imam to his face that if you were to take a fruit, like let's say a pomegranate, and cut it into two halves, and tell me that one half is halal and the other half is haram, I would accept that. Although logically it does not make sense. And how can half of a fruit be halal and half? Basically, he's trying to tell Imam al-Sadiq that when I hear your transmissions, when you tell me Rasulullah said this, I am not going to use my logic to question you and to say, well, how can this be? This doesn't make sense. How can half of it be halal? He says, I follow you unconditionally and I follow you unquestioningly. So he's a muqallid in the true sense of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He's an avid follower of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, this Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. This report of the pomegranate, they don't authenticate it, but it's just an indicator, zanni indicator if you like. So even if you remove it, what you cannot deny is that Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur was a very strong, an avid follower of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Now, according to the opinion of most of the people today in our communities, if you were to go and present the view of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, or if Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur were to rise from his grave and come and visit our communities around the world, yes, he would get labeled as a deviant thinker or an alternative thinker. But this is not something that he would have to worry about. This is something that you have to worry about, is that you have come so far from what the original was, that now actual students of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, if they were to come today, you would start labeling them as alternative thinkers or as deviant thinkers. So this is some soul searching, some introspection needs to be done about the status of our communities. Now this is at the level of communities, and scholars are not like this. Scholars are very tolerant. Those who are learned, and even traditional scholars, they are not intolerant when it comes to Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. They don't label him as an alternative thinker or as a deviant thinker just because he is a proponent of the theory of ulama abrar or nazariyat ulama al-abrar. No, the scholars are full of praises, fulsome praises for Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. For example, look at what Syed Ali Hur has to say about him in Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith, volume 11, page 102 onwards. He starts by quoting, this is biography number 6691, 6691. That's the entry. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, he first brings you the statement of Abu al-Abbas al-Najashi, whom Syed Ali Hur considers to be the leading authority of Ilm al-Rijal from the classical period. What does al-Najashi have to tell us about Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur? He says, Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur al-Abdi, wasmu Abi Ya'fur Waqid, wa qila Waqdan, yukanna Aba Muhammad, thiqatun thiqa. Al-Najashi says, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur al-Abdi is the son of Abu Ya'fur, whose actual name was Waqid, and some others say his father's name was Waqdan. The kunya of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is Abu Muhammad. He is thiqatun thiqa. He's a double thiqa. Yani extremely trustworthy. When he narrates from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and if the sanad up to him is correct, you don't ask any questions, you just accept. This is the narration of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, if Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is saying it is his narration. So what Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur transmits from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and Najashi, as per his manhaj, he says he's a double thiqa. You cannot falsify his narrations and what he transmits from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Okay, but he believes in the ulama abrar theory. He rejects the claim of Mu'alla bin Khunais, who is trying to give a divine station to the Imam. So does that not make him an alternative or deviant thinker? And Najashi would disagree. He says, Jalilun, after saying that he's a double thiqa, he's extremely reliable and trustworthy. He says, Jalilun fi ashabina. He is one of the really distinguished and esteemed Shia scholars of our sect, and Najashi says. Kareemun ala Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. He says this Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur, if you study his biography, you will find he was Kareemun ala Abi Abdullah. He was one of the most beloved companions and students of Al-Imam Abu Abdullah al-Sadiqi alayhi salatu wassalam. وَمَاتَ فِي أَيَّامِهِ. He died during the lifetime of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, because his death is reported to have occurred in the year 131 AH, in the lifetime of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and they claim Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam praised him. He died in a state whereby he was praised, he was praiseworthy in the eyes of the Imam. And Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur was no ordinary companion. He was one of the masters of Quran. وَكَانَ قَارِئًا يُقْرِئُ فِي مَسْجِدِ الْكُوفَةِ. And Najashi informs us that he's not some Tom, Dick or Harry or some greengrocer in Medina. No, he used to sit in Masjid al-Kufa, the Jama' al-Masjid al-Jami' in Kufa, the grand mosque of Kufa, and he used to teach Quran to the people of Kufa. So he's someone who is basically, who has that golden link to both of the Thaqalain, to the Kitab of Allah, which he taught throughout his life. He spent his life teaching Quran to people of Kufa in the Masjid of Kufa. And so he has that link with the Quran. He's very strong on the Quran. Obviously, they would not allow you to teach Quran in Kufa if you are not someone who had mastered the Quran. So he's a master of the Quran, and he has a link to the other part of the Thaqalain, which is the Ahlul Bayt of the Holy Prophet, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam. His teacher obviously is Imam As-Sadiq alayhi afdalu salatu wassalam, and he's taking his knowledge and his ilm and his understanding from Al-Imam Abu Abdullah As-Sadiq alayhi salam. And really he has transmitted some really valuable guidance. If you go to see in our books of narrations, for example, one authentic gift from Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur because he was among the fuqaha. He's among the most learned jurists from among the companions and students of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So one of the gifts that we can share with our youths, because this pertains to our youth, some of our young people, our young boys and girls, sometimes they find themselves in a dilemma that is very similar to a dilemma and a predicament that Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur himself found himself in. So this is Maulana narration from Al-Kafi. This is Furu' min Al-Kafi, volume 5, Kitabun Nikah. There is a bab that Al-Kulayni has labeled باب الرجل يهوى امرأة ويهوى أبواه غيرها. ويهوى أبواه غيرها. Okay, so there is a chapter in Al-Kafi on what to do. What is the hukum for a man who likes a certain woman and wants to marry her, but his parents don't like that woman. They don't like that girl. Okay, they like some other girl for their son. Rings a bell, yeah? Especially in the Indian subcontinent, many of our youths, yeah, this is a big dilemma for many of them. You want to marry someone, your parents are hell-bent against that person. They want you to marry someone else. And yeah, this is a huge problem in the Indian subcontinent. I recall I had a Maulana friend, Bicharo. When he was 3 years old, his grandfather fixed his marriage with one of his cousin sisters who had just been born. The girl is born, and the grandfather just fixed the marriage and said, you know what, these two, inshallah, when they grow up, marry them. This is my wasiyah. And when they grew up now, he's not exactly interested in her, but it's the wasiyah of the grandfather. So what does he do? So yeah, these kinds of things happen. Especially there is this tendency in some families, in some cultures, they want to keep marriages within their families, even though the children themselves don't want to have marriages inside the family, but somehow it is imposed on them. If you look at the neighboring Pakistan, you see this is very common, and that's why often you see that there are instances where people, cousin brothers, would actually have this understanding or this idea that they are bound to marry within the family. So Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, this is a narration from Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur in Al-Kafi, where the Imam is asked about this, that what are we supposed to do in such a situation? So Al-Imam Abu Abdullah al-Sadiq alayhi salam responds by saying, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur presents the case to him. He says, إني أريد أن أتزوج امرأة وإن أبوي أرادا غيرها. So he says, I'm in a situation whereby I want to marry someone, but my parents are interested in having me marry someone else. So what should I do in such a situation? So Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam tells him that تزوج التي هويت ودع التي يهوى أبواك. He says, in this case, as far as jurisprudence is concerned, as far as the hukum of the Sharia is concerned, you have the full freedom to marry the person that you like and to leave aside the choice that your parents have chosen for you. So ethically, from the point of view of akhlaq, obviously, you should give great value to the advice of your parents. And obviously, they're more experienced than you. So you should definitely take into account and consider what they're telling you. And you should seriously consider following their advice and their preference in such matters. But are you obligated to? Is it a faridah from Allah? Is it a kind of obligation whereby if you disobey them in this matter, you become sinful and you become disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and deserving of His punishment? Absolutely not. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam tells him that from the point of view of Sharia, تَزَوَّجِ الَّتِي هَوَيْتَ. You have the full freedom and right to marry the girl or the woman that you like. وَدَعِ الَّتِي يَهْوَى أَبَوَاكَ. And leave aside the person that your parents have chosen for you. So in any case, this is an example, and there are other examples in the Seerah and the Sunnah. For example, there is this woman by the name of Al-Khansa bint Khidam al-Ansariya. Islam is very particular about this. She comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she complains to him, and she says that my father has married me to a man without my pleasure. I wasn't really interested in marrying this man, but my father somehow without my full consent married me off to him. So the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the narrations say, فَرَدَّ نِكَاحَهَا. The Prophet invalidated her nikah then and there. He said, your nikah is invalid. If your consent and your active pleasure was not involved, and the marriage contract was solemnized without your active consent, then the marriage is void, it is batil, it is invalid. And there are so many narrations we have in the Sunnah in both Shia and Sunni books that confirm this idea. So in any case, as you can see, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is someone who is, and this narration is there, from the narration of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. It is present in Al-Kafi, and it has been authenticated by both Al-Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi in his Mir'atul Uqul fi Sharhi Akhbari al-Rasul. He authenticates it in volume 20, page 142 of his book. He refers to it as Muwathaq, reliable and authentic. And Al-Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Bahbudi, he authenticates it in his Sahih al-Kafi, volume 3, page 23, hadith number 2957. This is hadith number of Sahih al-Kafi, not of al-Kafi. In any case, so as you can see, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is a transmitter of the fiqh and the knowledge of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Beyond, after mentioning the statement of al-Najashi about him, Ayatollah Sayyid Abu al-Qasim al-Khuy says, وَعَدَّهُ الشيخ المفيد في الرسالة العددية من الفقهاء الأعلام والرؤساء المأخوذ منهم الحلال والحرام والفتيا والأحكام الذين لا يطعن عليهم ولا طريق لذم واحد منهم. Sayyid al-Khuy, after mentioning the statement of al-Najashi, he also quotes al-Shaykh al-Mufid, who interestingly is not a proponent of the ulama abrar theory. But as far as his opinion on Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is concerned, Sayyid al-Khuy reports, he says, وَعَدَّهُ الشيخ المفيد في رسالته العددية من الفقهاء الأعلام. He says, Shaykh al-Mufid has listed Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur in his Risala al-Adadiyya among the fuqaha al-a'lam, among the most distinguished fuqaha from among the companions of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. وَالرُّؤَسَاءِ الْمَأْخُوذِ مِنْهُمُ الْحَلَالُ وَالْحَرَامُ. He has listed him among the ru'asa, among the leaders of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, because not all of the companions are at the same level. You have senior level, highly distinguished companions, you have less learned companions, you have lower level companions. So, but Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur belongs to the elite core, the top brass, if you like, the top echelons of the students and companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. That's where he comes from. The people whom we take our halal and haram from, the people of futya, the people whose fatawi we take, whose ahkam in sharia we follow. الَّذِينَ لَا يُطْعَنُ عَلَيْهِمْ. And these are the companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam who are beyond reproach. You cannot discredit them. وَلَا طَرِيقَ لِذَمِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمْ. There is a whole list of these companions, and Shaykh al-Mufid claims that you cannot discredit even a single one of them. So Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur belongs to a very distinguished list. وعده ابن شهر آشوب من خواص أصحاب الصادق عليه السلام. Sayyid al-Khuy mentions that Ibn Shahr Ashub al-Mazindarani, the 6th century scholar, he lists Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur among the khawas, among the elite, the very special companions of Imam Abu Abdullah Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, كما تقدم في ترجمة حمران تفضيل الصادق عليه السلام له ولابن أبي يعفور على جميع أصحابه. Sayyid al-Khuy says, and if you recall in the biography of Humran ibn A'yan, who is the brother of Zurara, Sayyid al-Khuy is referring to his entry on Humran, and he says, if you go into our entry on Humran, you will encounter the narration that we've mentioned over there, in which you will encounter the statement of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, in which he declares Humran ibn A'yan and Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur to be the best companions among all his companions, and Tafdeel al-Sadiq, Imam considers them to be afdal. He considers them to be superior over and above all the other companions that Imam has. So these are the two most favored companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam according to certain narrations. That is what Syed Ali Hur is saying over here. This is volume 11, page 102 and 103 of his Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith wa Tafsil Tabaqat al-Ruwat. So I hope in light of this it is clear where this theory is exactly coming from. It is coming from a very distinguished companion of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. So now if you want to label him a deviant or alternative thinker, that is your choice. No one can stop you, freedom of speech, right? But if you are concerned about the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam, within the school of Ahlul Bayt, can we really declare people who hold these kinds of ideas to be deviant or alternative thinkers? Not really. Not according to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, not according to the companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur would not consider this theory to be a deviant or alternative theory, because it's the theory that he subscribes to. And so would the Ru'asa and the greatest and grandest companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and even the scholars afterwards who moved away from this theory and they developed other theories which have become more popular today. Even those scholars, they would say, this is if you go higher up, even today, if you go to higher level traditional scholars, they will say we don't accept the ulama abrar theory, but they would not say that people like Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, who are proponents of this theory, are deviant or alternative thinkers. They would say, well, that is their school, we respect them, we don't accept their theory, but that does not mean that we label them as deviants or as alternative thinkers. So yeah, once you go deeper into the sources, you realize there is a great deal of diversity within the school of Ahlul Bayt. It's not a monolithic. It's not that what's considered mainstream today necessarily was also considered mainstream in the past. In fact, Ayatollah Sheikh Abdullah Al-Mamqani has been trying to alert us in his 39-volume encyclopedia, which we keep referring to, Tanqih al-Maqal fi Ilm al-Rijal. He's repeatedly alerting you to this idea that yes, what is considered to be mainstream today, in the past it was considered to be part of ghulu. It was considered to be irtifa, heretical exaggeration, blasphemy even. But the tables have turned. Schools that were very powerful and dominant have become suppressed. They have been buried with the passage of time, and other schools have emerged and they have taken over and they now represent the mainstream. But yeah, so this you will encounter a lot of views which are popular today. In the past, they were considered to be examples of deviant and alternative thinking. And a lot of what was considered to be deviant and alternative thinking in the past, today it has become mainstream popular belief. Just deal with it. Now, what should the people do? The people need to research. Ultimately, when it comes to issues of aqidah, you cannot do taqleed, right? You have to do your own research. Study all the schools, and I think the madrasas should lead the way. Don't suppress knowledge. Otherwise, your students, if you just give them one side of the story or one side of the picture, and they discover the other side of the picture from somewhere else, they will feel cheated. They will feel deceived. So in terms of madrasa curriculum design, because every topic that we take, madrasa teachers come to us and say, well, what should we do then? So we say, well, in terms of madrasa curriculum design, teach both theories, or if there are more theories about the station of the Imams and what they actually are. So yeah, teach all the theories, okay? And because it's a matter of aqidah, you can't impose. You can't just say that because everyone follows one thing, you have to also follow. No, you have to search for the rational proofs, for the naqli proofs, and then ultimately, whatever you find most convincing to the point that you're prepared to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with it, and you can justify it in His court, you adopt that, and you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that particular theory. Simple as that. And there should be no imposition, there should be no compulsion, there should be no suppression of evidence or suppression of the freedom to express and discuss these theories. We should be open about it. What do we have to fear? No one is saying you have to accept this theory. Huh? No, if you are not convinced by it, if you have other proofs that you feel are more compelling, by all means go ahead, reject it. It is no one is saying that this ulama abrar is not part of our deen. It is not part of our aqidah. It's just our methodological, historical position. If you have a better position, you have more compelling evidence, go ahead, follow that. But ultimately, there should be at least the kind of tolerance that you are seeing at the level of scholars. It would be very nice to see the same level of tolerance at the level of our community leadership, at the level of our resident alims. It's the less learned mullahs that are the problem. They look at what's mainstream today and they immediately start labeling deviant thinker, alternative thinker, even though what you're labeling as deviant thinking or alternative thinking is supported by some of the top ashab of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and according to some narrations by even Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam himself. So this will put you under great embarrassment if on the day of judgment it turns out that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was indeed, as the narrations are indicating, himself a proponent and endorser of this theory. Or even if he was not, if some of his students were, won't it be embarrassing for you on the day of judgment to meet them and for them to find out that you are calling their beliefs deviant and alternative thinking? There's going to be a lot of awkwardness between you and them, right? So that's why it is better to follow a more tolerant and respectful approach. You see, traditional scholars today don't accept the theory of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, but do they disrespect him? Do they kick him out of the school or the madhab? No. They say, no, he's among the ru'asa, he's among the leaders, the most distinguished scholars, thiqatun thiqa, what he transmits from as-Sadiq, we close our eyes and accept. But, yeah, we don't necessarily accept everything that he has to transmit, and that's your right. No one is forcing you. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is not hujjah on you. But all I'm saying is that, yeah, don't just dismiss it as alternative or deviant thinking. Rather, say this is a school within the school of Ahlul Bayt and there are other schools within the school of Ahlul Bayt, and people should be free to follow, because there's either you say there is taqleed in Aqidah, which scholars are not prepared to accept. So if there is no taqleed in Aqidah, then people should have the options, they should have the choices should be in front of them, the different schools should be presented to them in full, with full evidence. What we have presented is just a surface level. There's a lot more. An entire book has been authored by Ayatollah Sheikh Mohsin Kadiwar about this. You study the evidences he's presenting, the arguments he's making, cross-reference, cross-check, verify, and after that form an informed conclusion, inshaAllah ta'ala. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. Also click the bell icon and choose the all option to get notified for upcoming videos automatically.